I might be a little rusty on the start thing. Hello and welcome to season 2021 of Great Things with Great Tech. My name is Anthony Spiteri, and this is a podcast about highlighting companies doing great things with great technology. This is episode 17, and today we're talking to Clint Wyckoff, Principal Tech Marketing Engineer at Nebulon. Good to have you on the show, Clint.
Fantastic, Anthony. So I just want to make sure I understand here that the title of the show is GTwGT.
GT. Yes? GTwGT. It rolls off the tongue, mate. GTwGT.
Not quite for me, but I'll be honest. I don't know. It's good. It's good. It's all good, mate.
maybe it's the Australian accent and the American thing. Maybe it's just a tongue twister. But as I go through this following set, you'll see how easy it rolls off, right? So, yeah, just before we get into the cool thing, what's that?
I said GTwGT.
GTwGT. You know, we could talk about this for the next 10 or so minutes, but let's crack in, right? Let's get into season 2021. But before that, just before we kick off, I want to start with a plug. And again, firstly, thank you to everyone for their support on GTwGT in the first year, 2020. We had 16 episodes, looking to basically pump and build on that in 2021. And if you like great things with great tech and you like to feature on future episodes, you can click on the link in the show notes or go to launch to GTwGT.com. See, that rolled off the tongue. Register your interest. All episodes of GTwGT are available on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe below. There's a little button down there. Also, obviously, we're on all the podcast stations. We're on Anchor, which feeds it to every single podcast platform out there, Google, Apple, Spotify. And also, we've got the website, GTwGT.com. That keeps everything up to date, has all the episodes and show notes where this will be as well. So there you go, Clint, GTwGT. Let's kick it off. Let's kick off Nebulon, because I'm really excited to have a, amazing, well, it's a company that's so young. It's actually the youngest company that I've had on GTwGT of the 16 previous episodes, right? But first, before we go into some of the history of the company, let's talk about the name. Where did that name come from? What are the origins of the name?
Yeah, so that's a good one, Anthony. So whenever the founders, and we'll talk about them here shortly, but whenever they were trying to think about the name of the company, right, and the fact that the platform itself, as you'll see, has been built with application owners in mind. So the premise behind the name Nebulon is to make the application owners front and center, right? So they want them to be the stars of the show. And the stars are built in nebula, right? So hence the nebu portion of the name. Yeah. But then also we want it to be at scale and always on, and know that your data is always available. So hence the Nebulon, the name there.
Yeah. Well, that works. It makes complete sense. Because I thought it had to be obviously some sort of star reference or something like that, right? So it completely makes sense. And the fact that you've got the name that's meaningful and not just something that's been created to, for marketing or whatever, that's actually a pretty cool, story and a great anchor for the company, I think. So now in terms of the founding, I think, this, like I said, this is the youngest company I've had, just come out of stealth last year, but it was founded basically in November of 2018. It was founded or co-founded by 4 people. It was David Scott, Samak. I'm going to tell me with these pronunciations. Maybe you go through the founders, mate, because there's a couple of
so you got David Scott, who's chief board member, David Scott, and then we have Samak Nazari, who's our chief executive officer, CEO. Then we have Sean Natati, who is our chief technology officer, CTO, and Craig Nunez, who is our COO. So yes, there's the 4 of them. The interesting part between the 4 of them is that they all worked together in previous lives. So they started a company that was called 3PAR Technology, which was subsequently purchased by Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and they branched off from there to start Nebulon.
So that's a really good sort of history and good sort of genes in the company, right? Because obviously you look at it in that lineage. 3PAR was a successful storage company in itself. I remember there was always 3PARs in any data center that I went in back when I used to go into data centers in my previous life. There was always 3PARs there. You always noticed it because it had a pretty distinct coloring, distinct logo. But they obviously had that acquisition by HP at the time and rolled in. So to see that there's a company built from that sort of success, obviously, is quite good. There was a seeding round of about 14 million. And then what I read as well on Crunchbase that on October 30, 2018, there was also Series A for about 3.5 million US. So the company is well funded in its early days. But maybe just talk about the fact that you just come out of stealth and you've been with the company for less than a year, roughly. How's it been working for a company that wasn't stealth, that came out of stealth, and then was until recently pre-GA?
Well, I'll tell you, Anthony. So I've been with Nebulon since July 1st. And to join a company that was pre-GA, this was my first startup that I've done that's pre-GA, which makes it quite interesting. And the nice part about that is you have the opportunity to do it right the first time from the start, right? And you have the chance to build upon experiences and things that you've done in the past that haven't worked, and things that you tried and true that do work well, which is nice. So the other part of it, which makes it quite interesting, is all the stuff. So joining a pre-GA company amidst has made it a challenge, but then it's also, I think, helped build the culture that we have here very, very well. So every Friday we have, an afternoon coffee talk, if you will. So we have an office in Belfast, Ireland, and UK and stuff, and over in Seattle. So we all get together, and so it's
so
the culture makes it
where are those
a lot
offices?
easier.
Where are those offices? Because obviously it's interesting. You got Belfast, and then where else have you got the offices?
Yeah, so the corporate headquarters is in Fremont, California. We have a cloud division, which is in Seattle. Imagine that. Cool. And then we also have a development center, which is over in Belfast, Northern.
That's awesome. Okay, that's an interesting mix there. Obviously, Ireland has got lineage with regards to tech companies. It's not totally surprising that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And I'm guessing that's coming from the co-founders, where they came from and all that kind of stuff. So look, Nebulon in itself, how would you describe Nebulon to any prospective customer, or even just from the outset? What's it all about?
So we've created a product which we call cloud-defined storage, right? So on the surface, there's cloud involved, and there's storage involved as well. So it's a SaaS-enabled, SaaS-managed offering that runs in any OEM-equipped server where we have an IoT endpoint that provides scale-out storage services that are based for application owners, right? So the cloud manages on-premises endpoints. So it's very much akin to what you might know if you were to go into your home and have like a smart thermostat or any other IoT endpoint that's managed by the cloud. Okay. The only difference there is we're delivering storage, enterprise storage, in a scale-out fashion for applications.
Okay. So it's, I guess, obviously, whenever you're in storage and whenever a new storage company comes into play, the question is, who are you competing against? So SAN arrays and HCI, you're not them, but you're competing against them. So it fits into neither category as I see it, because of the way that you've gone out. And you mentioned cloud-defined storage. So how does that pertain to what you guys are doing at Nebulon?
So in any conversation, it depends on who you talk to, right? So if you're talking with the application owner, they care specifically about their project and their deliverables that they're trying to get towards the app and the item that they're building. If you talk to a storage owner, you're immediately going to get sucked into the speeds and feeds of the storage array and how that operates, and how we compare to 3-tier SAN versus HCI versus DPU, GPU, and the whole landscape there. I would say the unique offering that we bring to the table there, Anthony, is the fact that we separate the on-prem data plane. So all the customer data still runs inside of their data center with scale-out storage performance. Okay. But it's managed from the cloud. So you get the best of both worlds. So you don't have to worry about frequent updates of all your SAN controllers, if you will. You still get incremental
can be painful. We all know that, right?
Cloud.
Yeah, we all know about the pains of storage controllers, and when they fail, everything goes to hell. So we've talked about that a lot. Well, I've talked about that with other people on the show, with regards to the pain points. And so for those at home. So when you say it's not managed, as I read it, so the control plane sits in a SaaS-based offering in the cloud. Okay.
Correct.
Now is that any cloud, or could that be is that hosted anywhere specifically, or is it actually offered as a SaaS-based application?
So from our perspective, at this point in time, it's offered as a SaaS-based application that runs inside of what we call Nebulon On, which is our cloud that we manage for our customers. Each customer, whenever they get onboarded, they get created an organization, which is the multi-tenant structure that separates customer A from customer B. And all their IoT endpoints, SPUs, NPODs, which we'll talk about in a little bit, all report up to the cloud, which is where they're managed.
Right. Okay. So, and is that running on, just in terms of touching the cloud side of that, obviously, is that running on a public cloud, or have you guys set up your own cloud? How does that work?
No, it runs in a public cloud provider, AWS specifically. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And, that's awesome. I just wanted to understand how that actually goes. Okay. So we've got this SaaS-based controller. And then I'm assuming that we're then effectively talking to something on premises or in a data center, wherever it might be. What's the IoT component of that makes that binds the two together, the on-prem with that SaaS-based cloud controller?
So each server, an application server. So let's take an example use case of everybody's familiar. Everyone that listens to this is probably familiar with what a VMware cluster is.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a VMware cluster that, let's say, has 8 hosts in it. Those hosts are HP DL380 servers. Each one of those servers would be equipped with one of our IoT devices, which we call a services processing unit. It's a full height, full length, full width, GPU style storage controller that does all of the storage processing. Okay.
Yeah.
They're clustered together. So each server forms the vSphere cluster, but it also forms what we call an NPOD. And that's what delivers shared storage across the cluster.
Okay. So these SPUs, they effectively replace traditional RAID card or HBAs as you would. Is that kind of where they sit, those SPUs?
Yep. Or storage controller as well. So it's doing all the storage processing, compression, deduplication, erasure, coding, encryption. All that is done at the controller level in a scale out fashion. So each one of the SPUs themselves are doing all of those services locally on the actual SPU. So the benefit that you get there is from a customer is you don't have to worry about managing controller VMs or VIB packages that take up, many percentages of host virtual machine usage, right? Taking away from the host VMs to do storage processing. So that's what I'm kind of getting as the value prop here is that, because you've got the brains and the controller kind of segmented or detached from the actual storage or the actual compute that's on-prem, that means you're saving cycles. So, the overheads of HCI have been argued effectively, right? And to a certain extent, people are okay with understanding that if you go with HCI, you're going to lose a percentage of CPU, you're going to lose a chunk of RAM. And then obviously when you translate that to a more traditional monolithic SAN, you've got to pay a premium for those controllers. And those controllers on a monolithic SAN become a single point of failure as well. And again, like we said, a lot of the problems that come with storage outages are driven from the controllers. And because they are like Windows CE boxes or they're a type of Linux box, pumped with, RAM and memory that can go wrong. So I'm guessing this is where the biggest value benefit is of your solution for Nebulon, is that you take all that pain, all that overhead, and have it shifted and living in that cloud SaaS-based offering. Well, so just to be clear, Anthony, the actual storage processing remains inside the customer data center. Customer data and all that stuff never leaves the data center. If you were to go out and you were to clip the WAN connection for the customer, their storage would still operate as if it was the cloud was up. The only difference.
Good point. Good clarification.
Pretty user interface to log into to see, telemetry data and metrics and all that kind of stuff, right? The benefits that the cloud provides is from a management perspective, as well as from an intelligence perspective as well. Yeah. So those SPUs are reporting back to the cloud performance metrics, telemetry, deduplication ratios, compression, all that type of stuff that we're gathering. We're doing machine learning and artificial intelligence on it. So if we see that customer A over here had a specific behavior, we're able to then learn over time that customer B and C and D, based on this specific pattern, right? We can proactively reach out to them. So part of our support offering is being preventative and proactive.
Okay,
we'll automatically create alerts and all that type of stuff and notify customers before issues happen based on the AI and ML we're running on our data lake that is in the cloud.
Okay, yeah, no, understand that. Yeah, that's awesome. In terms of the hardware that's running on premises, I noticed that you guys have hardware partnerships with Supermicro, HPE. So is this an OEM product as such?
It is, and it's only a greenfield play as well, meaning no brownfield deployments as well. So no
Right.
complex. I think this is having lived the HCI life in the previous world. I know that brownfield deployments oftentimes end in a very convoluted, complex scenario. So the fact that it's only available at the time of server acquisition, I actually think is a very good thing, because for
Yep.
us, from a qualification perspective, it gives us a defined set of standards that we know we're working against. We know that HP has this set of servers that we've qualified, that we're working with, this drive, these options of drives, these firmwares, etc. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is from like Supermicro perspective, they don't sell storage. So we're opening many different doors for them to go to knock on and have conversations with that like Supermicro servers. And then we'll onboard other partners in the future as well.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Um, so in terms of advantages, we've talked about CPU, offloading. We've talked about the fact that you don't have to have those overheads that traditionally would have in HCI or SANs. How about just from a raw performance point of view? Like, what are you guys seeing there? How does performance come into play with Nebulon in terms of just raw disk I/O and latency and that sort of thing?
Sure. So it is I'll prelude the conversation here with understanding that it is a PCI Gen 3 card. So it's not PCI 4 just yet. That's something that's on the roadmap, because whenever we were looking at designing the product, this is oftentimes, if you're talking to a storage sort of guru that cares about speeds and feeds and knobs and dials and all that type of thing, the first question they're going to drill into is, the specifics of the card.
Yeah.
And so it does offer storage from a PCI 3 bus perspective. The actual storage controller itself has an 3 gigahertz 8-core ARM processor with 32 gigabytes worth of DDR ECC protected RAM that offers battery backed up as well, so that if there is an outage, it gets persisted to disk.
Yep.
So there is separate fault and power domains from the actual host operating system to the storage controller device, right? So then from a performance perspective, customers typically see about 35,000 IOPS per SPU. Mind you, this isn't a scale out fashion with millisecond range latency.
Okay.
Right? So if you're going to take a single SPU and compare it against your whiz bang flash array, you're not comparing apples to apples. It is a scale out storage.
That's cool. And I think we're going to talk about use cases a little bit later on, because I think it then pertains to that, because when you democratize performance, which I think, this the advancement of technology of the hardware, of the disk, to a certain extent has democratized performance and latency versus what we used to see 5-10 years ago was always a problem. How much latency are you going to do? How many IOPS? But to a certain extent, the playing field's leveled. So then what else do you offer? And I think we've kind of worked through that with Nebulon in terms of that, the way that it's architectured, the way that it's offered. And then we'll just get into use cases. But before use cases, I want to talk about automation. Everyone knows that we love automation. I love automation. You love automation. The one thing that I noticed is that obviously you guys have a strong API. Like, that should be a given today. Like any new company that comes out, they have the advantage of working in that API first mentality or the API native mentality. So that shouldn't be, a surprise or a given. I know that you guys have got PowerShell modules, Python modules, but how important is the automation, the API, the interfaces for you? Because at the top, you did mention about developers, application devs, storage admins. So where does it sit from both sides? And this isn't really a dev versus ops situation, but I guess you could see it as that. It's more of a application owner versus a storage owner. So how is automation helping that?
So I think the best way to start the conversation here for a few minutes, Anthony, is to shift the focus. So if you look at why customers go to the cloud, what do they like about the cloud? The cloud isn't necessarily, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily have to be a specific location, right? It's ultimately, at the end of the day, it's servers in somebody's data center someplace. Yeah. More along the lines of what you're subscribing to is a mindset, in the fact that I want to go out and procure things and provision resources that I need for my specific application needs on demand in a self-service fashion. right? That's one of the primitives, if you will, that cloud is built upon, is that utility style computing. I want it, tear it down, right? So all of that is dependent upon an API structure. So from our perspective, we built the entire platform around a GraphQL API. We have many SDKs. One of the other cool things that I'll note is whenever you go in and you're provisioning storage, if you will, for your application servers, all of it can be done as part of a CI/CD pipeline. If you like Terraform, we're working on that. If you use Ansible, we're going to have an Ansible set of playbooks and modules for that as well. So it'll plug into any common infrastructure as code framework that a customer is using, but it's all based upon templates. Yeah. So much like the Amazon Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace, where they go out and say, you know, I want one of these, spin, go, right? All of that is available through cloud-defined storage from an API perspective. Yeah. So the storage owner can go in and say, you know what, these are my best practices. I want, you know, this percentage of deduplication ratio. They need to be, you know, mirrored, blah, blah, blah. Here you go. You can come and consume it. This is your bank of servers that you can provision.
Okay. So I'm an application developer. I'm developing like a database application or something. So I would basically go and request through the API or through some sort of programmatic interface, some storage from the Nebulon system. And then that would then provision some sort of storage. So we're not talking, are we talking about traditional LUNs or partitions? Like what does that look like? And I guess that depends on where you're serving it. And I know that you guys do stuff with Kubernetes as well. You've got a storage integration there. So just kind of for people that might not have wrapped their heads around, like I'm kind of trying to work that out. How does that work? If I'm an application developer and I want to get some storage, what does that actually mean end to end?
I will say that from an application owner perspective, you don't care. Under the covers, it is LUNs and volumes that get masked out and carved out and presented to servers as block storage, right? So that's okay. Under the covers, that's specifically what happens.
Yes.
However, you from an application owner don't necessarily need to worry about that, right? So whenever you go in and you say, I want to provision an NPod, that NPod could be shared storage for a VMware data store. That NPod could also comprise local boot volumes as well, right? So I can go in and say, you know what, I want to have this boot image presented to this set of servers that's cloud init enabled. It's going to go ahead and power on, run the set of scripts. And at the end, I know I'm going to have my known configuration where I want to build my Kubernetes pods, for example.
Right, okay.
Where we have our CSI driver. So
yeah. And then under the surface, it's then policy driven from the point of view of that developer or whoever is requesting the storage. Like you said, wants a certain type of dedupe, wants a certain type of compression, wants a certain type of performance vector. So that's what they get at the end. It's just presented as it is, but they're basically wanting it as per the policy that they've defined effectively.
Right. And I think the other thing that's worth noting out is, you know, self-service infrastructure on premises is the reason why customers, application owners go and drop their credit card in the cloud.
Yeah. That's that Nebulon. That's what you wanted. You guys want to make those guys the stars, right? So it all ties back to the name and the genesis of that. No, that's cool.
It does. And the organization themselves have to be bought into that self-service mindset, right? So yeah, if you go and look at why people move to the cloud, an organization has to be bought into self-service. They want to keep their data on premises for specific reasons.
That's cool. All right, let's jump to use cases. We kind of alluded to that a little bit later. What are the use cases for Nebulon? Where are you guys going to make your first bit of traction? Just coming out of GA, so you've obviously got customers now. What are you targeting in terms of use cases and customers?
So you have your traditional storage use cases where customers have storage refresh, whether that be 3-tier SAN or hyper-converged offering, or even server refresh as well as part of it, since we are a greenfield offering. Yep. If you look at it from an application perspective, we oftentimes get pulled into the VMware conversations. The other interesting bit that folks like about the way that we do things is for Kubernetes deployment. So you did mention earlier that we do have a CSI driver for Kubernetes. The other one that's been a big play for us, believe it or not, is the service provider area.
Okay, that's cool.
When your heritage with Etagrid, knowing the fact that we're an API-first architecture, giving that self-service provisioning model. We have quite a few service providers in Europe, believe it or not, that are that are customers of cloud-defined storage, and they're looking to build offerings off of our platform.
All right.
Which brings me to the last use case is at the edge, and being able to, because the management at scale and the simplicity and the cost benefits that we offer, it automatically gets us pulled into some really unique edge conversations. Like we have one of the service providers we're working with in Europe. They're actually deploying us in container pods, specifically inside of like containers that they ship to remote areas inside of Africa to touch different areas there. And it's a fantastic benefit for them from a power and cooling. And they're doing some really interesting things there.
And that's what I was going to say, because I obviously the linkage between IoT lends itself to edge. That's kind of the two and two go together. So I kind of figure that might be a potential use case. But the service provider angle is really cool. I obviously think that service providers are so bleeding edge when it comes to innovative technologies. Everyone's doing the old research. Like if I was back in my old role, I'd be interested in this to see what it would offer, and the whole control, the whole API mindset definitely adds itself. And service providers also are so concerned with performance and being ways to make things efficient. And that's kind of how I read this, in terms of, one of the value adds for the actual platform. So yeah, I'm not surprised that service providers are actually, big on that use case. So let's start to wrap up a little bit. So, again, being so fresh, the disruption's happening. So how have you guys initially disrupted the storage market? Like what's been the driver there?
So the driver there, I would say, is just folks are ready for a change. They're looking for, if you look at the self-service mindset that we just talked about, and the fact that API first architectures and things of that nature, traditional storage arrays are not built with APIs in mind.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, maybe they do have an API that has been bolted on after the fact, but they're not built specifically with automation in mind. I would say that's the first part of it, right? The second part of it is the management perspective that we bring, and having things managed from the cloud and being able to quickly update at scale, not having to constantly worry about firmware updates to get any new features. So if you look at the way that traditional storage, you have the data plane and the control plane are tightly bound together. If I want to get the benefit from one, I've got to touch both, right? Yeah. And since we separate those, we're doing microservice updates constantly in the cloud. So you could log in tomorrow and be like, oh, I got a new feature over here, or a new little graph, or whatever the team, much like Gmail or Office 365, without having to touch the on-prem data plane itself. So that's a secure, hard, fast, steady state that runs inside of a customer environment. So we're separating them, management at scale, which is one of the benefits that the cloud offers.
And I just had a thought as well, like, we now, and I guess also this comes from the industry that I'm in as well. It's like we were looking at a competitor this week and going, you know what? They're like 7 or 8 years old now. They can't call themselves a new startup or the new kids on the block anymore. You know what I mean? Like, so somewhere along the line, these other dudes are coming in and they're the new startups and they're the new. So I think what I'm trying to get at is in the storage space, like, there was obviously the traditional storage vendors that were around maybe until the 2010s or so, 2013s. And then there was those new guys on the block that came out and were successful. But now they're not so much new anymore. I mean, they're still obviously there. There are some of them who didn't get acquired or established, but there's a new wave coming through, right? And I guess Nebulon is the front of that new wave in terms of doing things different again and trying to disrupt the industry. And now that's your advantage, right? Because you've seen the last.
Well, I give the founders a lot of credit here, and the fact that you mentioned this, the company itself was founded in 2018. Having the forethought at the time to come up and think of placing storage control services on a scale-out GPU-style IoT endpoint device. C-Mac likes to tell a story about he was meeting with a large bank whenever he was in his previous slate at HPE, and he did want to have to install software on that's how they came up with the actual thought of cloud-defined storage and what it's come into today. But the point that I'm getting at here is the fact that having that forethought back, a few years ago, to see the market validation with other companies that have launched somewhat similar scale-out DPU, GPU, smart NIC offload engines Look at what AWS is doing with the Nitro card. I think the company itself is poised to definitely disrupt things as time goes on here, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
That's awesome, yeah, and it's also a case of a build up to when the time is right. You've got to enter a market when the time is right. I've spoken to different companies on this show with, and some of them have said, we're here today, but we know that this is really going to kick off in 5 years. We're working today for what comes tomorrow. So this is a great example of that. It's awesome. And a side note, I just remembered the little IoT devices and whatnot. They're a pretty cool color. They look really cool as well. So maybe I'll put some show notes on in terms of the link to what they look like and a bit more detail around that, because you got to make these things look cool as well if they got GPU devices and whatnot. that's important as well. Even though they're in a data center somewhere, you got to do it. All right, mate, no worries. So I think we'll start to wrap up. Just before, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about in terms of, where people can go to find out more about Nebulon, any resources or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's a few different places. It all starts at nebulon.com, right? So that'd be the first place that I would send you. The second place, if you're watching GTwGT.
GTwGT.
If you're watching this show, you're familiar with YouTube, search for Nerd Talk. It's a show that I actually run where we do live streams every couple of weeks or so. We have actually one coming up here on Monday, February 8th, where Craig and I are going to sit down and talk about the GA. Yep. So you can go there. But then we also do proof of concepts as well, VPOCs as we call them, where we run them inside of our data center, and you as a customer can remote in and get the benefits and check out and kick the tires on cloud-defined storage without having to install any servers inside of your environment.
Okay, good stuff. Awesome. All right, then. So I'll put that all there. Right, let's wrap it up. So, thanks, Clint. Thanks, Nebulon, for being on. The show notes will be on the website. They'll be on the YouTube. They'll be on the podcast. You can find me at Anthony Spiteri on Twitter, and GTwGT podcast and GTwGT.com. Again, Clint, it just rolls off the tongue. We'll get there with you. But if you haven't subscribed, or if you're new to the show and you like what you hear, you can subscribe to us on any podcast client or on YouTube below. And with that, thank you, Clint. Thank you, Nebulon, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. It's been fantastic, and I wish you all the best.
Cheers, mate.